Thank you for joining us for our series dedicated to the 2014 Standards for Accreditation. As part of their membership, Middle States accredited institutions must demonstrate that they meet or exceed the expectations for academic and institutional integrity and quality promoted through the 2014 Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation. This module will share the expectations relating to Standard VII, Governance, Leadership, and Administration. After viewing this module, we hope that you will become familiar with the 2014 Standards for Accreditation, be able to assess institutional compliance using the criteria from Standard VII, understand what documentation will be useful in demonstrating compliance with Standard VII, be able to articulate the role of assessment as it relates to Standard VII, and better understand the Commission's requirements of affiliation and how they relate to Standard VII. While the Commission has many relevant resources to assist you and your colleagues with demonstrating compliance with the standards and requirements of affiliation, the focus of this presentation will come from the Commission's publication Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation, the 13th edition. You can find this on the Commission's website and download a PDF version if you do not have a hard copy. This presentation will focus on Standard VII, which you can find by turning to page 13. In total, the process for ensuring compliance relies on the determination that an institution has demonstrated that it's in compliance with the Commission's 15 requirements of affiliation and 7 standards for accreditation. Compliance with both the requirements of affiliation and standards for accreditation is expected to be continuous. Institutions are, in most instances, comprehensively evaluated on both the requirements of affiliation and the standards for accreditation at the time of their self-study evaluation. Institutions will be evaluated according to the requirements, standards, and their criteria within the context of institutional mission. This slide lists the Commission's 15 requirements of affiliation. Note that 2 requirements in particular, number 12, governance structure, and number 13, governing board conflicts of interest, have been highlighted. These 2 requirements are directly related to Standard VII. Some requirements of affiliation will be addressed within the self-study document, while others may be addressed through some other compliance mechanism. This slide provides you with one recommended approach for aligning the requirements of affiliation likely to be addressed in the self-study document with the appropriate standards. This is one approach of many, however, the appropriate linkages are made between requirements of affiliation and the standards. Put another way, institutions can and will address various requirements of affiliation in the self-study report itself, as this chart demonstrates. Institutions endeavoring to demonstrate compliance with requirements of affiliation 12 and 13 can do so successfully by addressing them partially in a well-written, analytically based self-study section that addresses Standard VII. Let's take a look at requirements 12 and 13. Requirement of Affiliation number 12 communicates the Commission's expectation that the institution will fully disclose its governance structure, including any related entities. Requirement of Affiliation 13 communicates the Commission's expectation that the institution and its governing board adhere to a conflict of interest policy that ensures the academic and fiscal integrity of the institution. Consistent with the guiding principles of the Commission, mission-centeredness, student learning, innovation, and continuous improvement, it's important to note that both the requirements of affiliation and standards for accreditation stress that institutions are expected to demonstrate that they engage in assessment processes that regularly inform continuous quality improvement, overall institutional effectiveness, and the effective management of student learning. It's important to remember, however, that when an institution demonstrates that it meets Standard VII, it must also demonstrate how it complies with the relevant requirements of affiliation. Institutions will need to include within their self-study materials how the criteria within each standard is met, as well as how the relevant requirements of affiliation is also met. This may or may not require a separate analysis within the self-study document, but a clear indicator addressing the appropriate requirement of affiliation will be necessary. Some institutions have provided headings that include references to specific requirements of affiliation, or have footnoted or offset notations in the margin of the self-study document to indicate that the analysis provided also speaks to and demonstrates compliance with the appropriate requirement of affiliation. While the Commission is not prescriptive in terms of how compliance is documented, institutions have to be mindful of the appropriate alignment of the requirements of affiliation with the standards and clearly indicate to the evaluation team where that has been satisfied in the self-study document. Accompanying and consistent with the requirements of affiliation are the Commission's standards for accreditation. Let's review the language in the criteria of Standard VII. Standard VII: Governance, Leadership, and Administration. The institution is governed and administered in a manner that allows it to realize its stated mission and goals in a way that effectively benefits the institution, its students, and the other constituencies it serves. Even when supported by or affiliated with governmental, corporate, religious, educational system, or other unaccredited organizations, the institution has education as its primary purpose, and it operates as an academic institution with appropriate autonomy. Overall, an institution should have a clearly defined system of governance to effectively and ethically serve its constituencies to fulfill its mission, vision, and strategic goals across all levels of the college and locations as applicable. Each institution should adopt a governance structure that best suits the needs of the institution and allows the institution to achieve its mission and goals. This is supported by a variety of attributes that are noted within the criteria of Standard VII. Note that this standard speaks to the governance of the institution, both the governing body, for example, a board of trustees, and shared governance within the institution, for example, the institution's committee or governance structure, which includes all constituencies. It is important to realize that analysis under this standard would include the role of students in that governance structure as well. This standard also speaks to the institution's leadership, specifically the chief executive officer, as well as the administration. That is, those that support the chief executive officer and the mission of the institution. In what follows, the various criteria that constitute Standard VII will be explained. This standard has a total of 5 criteria, which are noted on this and the next slide in general terms. As we review the criteria, you and your colleagues should be thinking about resources that are available at the institution that could be relied upon to demonstrate compliance with each criterion. These can be policies, procedures, or other types of evidence that would demonstrate during review that the institution meets the criteria. You should also be identifying how and when the institution assesses or reviews those items and what changes have resulted from the assessment. Criteria 1 through 3 focus on the governance structure, the governing body, and the institution's chief executive officer. Criteria 4 and 5 focus on the characteristics of the administration and the periodic assessment of the governance, leadership, and administration. Now we'll look more closely at each one. In Criterion 1, it's noted that an accredited institution possesses and demonstrates a transparent governance structure that is clearly communicated to institutional stakeholders. When reviewing appropriate evidence, you and your colleagues should be able to answer questions regarding the institution's governance structure, including what is the institution's governance structure, what roles are included in this structure, and what are the responsibilities of various constituents. Are written policies and procedures available that outline governance responsibilities for constituents, and are those readily available to the campus community? Do written governing documents, such as a constitution, bylaws, enabling legislation, charter, or other similar documents, delineate the governance structure and the structure's composition, duties, and responsibilities? Do the written governing documents assign authority and accountability for policy development and decision-making, including a process for the involvement of appropriate institutional constituencies in policy development and decision-making? Do the written governing documents provide an appropriate opportunity for student input regarding decisions that affect them? Criterion 2 has 9 sub-criteria that outline the desired qualities of the governing body. The first 3 sub-criteria are listed on this slide. Tying back to Standard 1, Mission and Goals, an institution's mission statement should be formally ratified and supported by its primary governing body. A key goal for a governing body is to enable the institution to fully realize its stated mission and goals in an effective manner. Also key for the governing body is the need for them to have sufficient independence and expertise to ensure the integrity of the institution. Further, the governing body should be able to ensure that its members do not interfere in the day-to-day operations of the institution. Frequently, this is covered by policies such as conflict of interest or institutionally developed guidelines for the Board of Trustees. Continuing with the qualities of the governing body as outlined in Criterion 2, the body should oversee at the policy level the quality of teaching and learning, the approval of degree programs and awarding of degrees, the establishment of personnel policies and procedures, the approval of policies and bylaws, and the assurance of strong fiscal management. This sub-criterion is not directing the governing body to get down in the weeds and oversee the development of every course or course-level learning outcome, but instead indicates that the governing body should be aware at the larger institutional policy level of the quality of the education the institution offers and how board oversight of personnel policies and procedures, as well as fiscal management, could have an effect on that quality. The governing board should also have a basic policy-making role in financial affairs to ensure integrity and strong financial management. That is, as a governing body or board, the members should understand the importance of appropriate fiscal management. The administrative body should also appoint and regularly evaluate the performance of the Chief Executive Officer. The Chief Executive Officer, frequently titled College or University President, reports in on the organizational structure to the governing board, who is responsible for working with the Chief Executive Officer to set performance goals, indicators, and evaluating them on a regular or ongoing basis. What is critical in this criterion is the reference to regularly evaluates the performance. There should be an evaluation process for the Chief Executive Officer that is well documented and regular. When discussing governance, the institution's governing body is responsible for the overall oversight of the institution, and they should do so and be informed in all its operations by principles of good practice in board governance. The governing body should be free of conflicts of interest that would inhibit their governing. As noted earlier, evidence within this criterion of written conflict of interest policy, accompanied by a process for declaring and managing conflicts of interest, would suffice. And lastly, for Criterion 2, the governing body should support the Chief Executive Officer in maintaining the autonomy of the institution. The Chief Executive Officer of the institution, be it a president or chancellor or whatever title given, should be someone appointed and evaluated by the governing body and is qualified for the role or position they hold. It's important for the Chief Executive Officer to have the proper authority and autonomy to perform their job. Thus, in subcriterion C, the criterion notes that this assumption includes such things as developing and implementing institutional plans, staffing the organization, identifying and allocating resources, and, reaching back to Standard I, directing the institution towards attaining the goals and objectives set forth in the mission. Criterion 3 also speaks to the institution's Chief Executive Officer's administration, in that they will have the assistance of qualified administrators, sufficient in number, to enable the Chief Executive Officer to discharge their duties effectively, and is responsible for establishing procedures for assessing the organization's efficiency and effectiveness. Criterion 4 addresses the Chief Executive Officer's administration. As noted in the previous criterion, it's expected that the Chief Executive Officer has the support of an administration made up of qualified administrators, sufficient in number, to enable the Chief Executive Officer to discharge their duties effectively. This criterion further defines the overall institutional administration as a body with documented and defined reporting relationships, and that has the relevant experience and credentials consistent with, and in support of, the mission of the institution. Like the Chief Executive Officer, the administration should have procedures for assessing the organization's efficiency and effectiveness, as indicated in Criterion 3. Finally, Criterion 5 speaks to the periodic assessment of the effectiveness of the institution's governance, leadership, and administration. How does the institution assess the effectiveness of the governance, leadership, and administration? The periodic assessment should demonstrate that the assessment is part of a systematic, ongoing process for improvement. Some critical areas for institutions to think about include what data do you already have available? What are the gaps in the data in your assessment of the governance, leadership, and administration of the institution? Are governing documents updated and/or readily available? Were the structures or documents in place developed through a collaborative process? How effectively does the governing body fulfill their roles and responsibilities, and how do you know? Some institutions rely upon an annual evaluation that the board conducts, which culminates with an annual retreat. This provides an opportunity for the governing board to make changes that they see are warranted from the self-evaluations. While the Commission does not prescribe any single approach, it is important that institutions be prepared to demonstrate that the assessment of the effectiveness of its governance structures, including the board as well as the committee structure in place at the institution, that is designed to promote shared governance. The starting point of the conversation may be to understand how often and in what way the governing body evaluates its own performance. What changes have been made over time as a result of those evaluations? The expectation is periodic assessment, so all governing boards must be engaged in assessment to determine their effectiveness. How often and in what way does the governing body evaluate the performance of the chief executive officer? What process is used? How often? How are the results of that evaluation used? How regularly is the administration evaluated? How are those results used? How have the operations been enhanced as part of those evaluations? Assessment is embedded within every standard. Key questions regarding the assessment taking place relating to the institution's governance, leadership, and administration include: is the process meaningful? To what extent do stakeholders trust what information is in front of them? How well are the assessments directly related to the institution's governance, leadership, and administration? Is the process useful? After receiving the assessment information, how engaged are key institutional stakeholders in using the information to enhance the institution's governance, leadership, and administration, to consider shifts in services or programs, or in other areas that could impact the institution's governance, leadership, and administration? What are the ties from the assessment practices to the institutional planning, resource allocation, and institutional effectiveness evaluations? Is the process cost-effective and efficient? Is the process efficient enough to be worth the effort? To what extent has assessment become an ordinary process as opposed to being a burden? Can multiple stakeholders attest to how the assessment process has added value to their professional practice? These are important questions that, when answered, can enable institutions to continuously improve the student experience, ensuring the institution's governance, leadership, and administration is maximized and sustained over time. Having reviewed all the criteria, it's important to come back to and reflect upon the language of the standard. These criteria, taken together, specify the characteristics or qualities that encompass Standard VII. Alongside the standard itself, it's important to remember that these criteria should be considered holistically within the context of institutional mission. These criteria do not represent a checklist. However, they embody the areas that institutions are expected to address within the standard. The language of the standard should not be lost within the criteria, and institutions should demonstrate how they embody the language of the standard, as well as have policies, procedures, or other documentation relating to each criterion. Let's focus on evidence for a moment. This slide provides you with a list of possible policies, procedures, and documentation that institutions may use to demonstrate that they meet this standard. This list does not imply that these are the required documents, nor does it imply that these are the only documents. What the Commission wants to convey is that it will be critically important for you and your colleagues to determine what evidence, in the form of policies, procedures, and other documentation, exists at the institution to provide evidence of effectiveness, institutional improvement, and compliance under this standard. Aligning institutional evidence alongside of each criterion lends to a gap analysis that can be done to determine where resources may need to be developed, better documented, or updated. The current practice and process at the Commission is to capture institutional evidence in what we call a documentation roadmap. This is a template document that provides institutions with a listing of the criteria with each standard, with an accompanying empty box for institutions to fill in with their evidence. It is a document that allows for an institution to conduct a gap analysis quickly and easily, and serves as a tool for gathering evidence. Again, because the criteria are listed along with the requirements of affiliation, this template will promote resource and evidence gathering in an organized and methodical manner designed to support accreditation activities. The documentation roadmap template is available on the Commission's website. The Commission hosts a variety of activities, online and face-to-face, designed to keep you informed about our expectations, support the activities of member institutions, and provide you with avenues to collaborate with colleagues across the region. These include webinars, workshops, training for peer evaluators, as well as our annual conference. If you have ideas about specific opportunities that you would like to see the Commission support, please contact us to let us know. You can find additional information about the Commission through our website, including how to reach staff. If you have any questions about the information presented in this video, please contact your staff liaison at Middle States. Every member institution is assigned a staff liaison. To find who's been assigned to your institution, visit our website, click on Institutions, find your institution listed, and click on Detail View. Other information about your institution is available through the link Statement of Accreditation Status, which is below the Detail View link.